If you cross this line, you threaten everything we stand for.
Nobody wants a fight, but we can't stop progress. We need to find another way.
"I want to have at least 5 children," said the Apache woman, and changed the lonely cowboy's life. The desert was quiet that afternoon, the sun hanging low in the sky, spreading a warm, golden light over the sand and sparse shrubs. The town nearby was small, just a scattering of wooden buildings with creaking signs, and dusty streets where people moved slowly, speaking only when necessary. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and secrets rarely lasted long. Yet for the cowboy, it felt like the world had grown small in a different way. He had lived there for years, and though the town buzzed faintly with life, he moved through it almost like a shadow, present but unnoticed. He was a man of few words. His life had been shaped by routine and solitude. Every morning he woke before the sun, saddled his horse, and rode out to check fences or guide cattle across the dry plains. His hands were calloused and strong, his body lean from years of hard work. But inside, he carried a quiet emptiness, a feeling that somehow life had passed him by. The townspeople knew him as reliable, capable, and steady, but none could say they knew the man behind the eyes that had grown a little colder with each passing year. He had been alone for so long that he had stopped imagining a different life. It was on such an afternoon, when the air smelled faintly of sagebrush and the wind whispered through the canyon, that she appeared. She came down the trail from the hills, riding slowly, her posture confident yet calm. She was an Apache woman, known in the town for her quiet strength and her pride in her heritage. People often spoke in admiration of her, though few spoke directly with her. She carried herself with a dignity that made it clear she was accustomed to being respected. Her eyes were sharp, dark, and observant, and she noticed things about people that others often missed. Their first meeting was simple, almost accidental. The cowboy was mending a fence, hammering nails into weathered wood, when he heard the soft sound of hooves approaching. He looked up, squinting against the sun, and saw her horse step onto the sandy path. She stopped at a short distance, watching him quietly. For a moment neither spoke. The wind carried the faint scent of her hair, of earth and smoke, and the cowboy felt a strange stir inside him, a feeling he had not experienced in years. "Hello," she said finally, her voice calm but carrying a certain certainty that made him sit up straighter. "Hello," he replied, tipping his hat out of habit. There was a pause, and then she said something that startled him, not because of its content but because of the confidence behind it. "I want to have at least 5 children," she said, looking at him directly. The cowboy froze. He was not sure if she expected a response, or if it was simply a statement she had chosen to share. He had spent so many years in silence that words, especially bold ones, felt heavy and strange. 5 children. The idea was almost absurd in his mind. He had never thought about having children. He had never thought about marriage or families. He had lived a life shaped by quiet solitude, and the concept of a bustling household seemed foreign. Yet there was something about the way she said it that made him listen. She did not ask. She did not plead. She stated it simply, as if it were a matter of fact, like saying the sky was blue or the sun would rise tomorrow. There was no pressure, no demand. Just a vision of a life fully imagined, a life that required courage and commitment. He nodded slowly, unsure of what to say. "That is a lot," he finally managed, his voice rough from disuse. She smiled, but it was not a teasing smile. It was warm, steady, and full of understanding. "I know," she said, "but I also know what I want. I do not want to live a life afraid of wanting something." Her words struck him in a way nothing else had in years. They were simple words, yet they carried a weight, a challenge, and a promise all at once. He looked at her, and for the first time in a long while he felt as if someone saw him, not just the quiet man doing his job, but the man who had lived through loss, loneliness, and regret. They talked for a while that day, slowly, carefully. She asked about his life, about the land he worked, about his family, and he found himself opening up in ways he had forgotten were possible. He told her of his childhood, of his parents who had passed when he was young, of the long years of solitude and hard work that had become his companion. She listened, not interrupting, not judging. She only nodded, her presence steady and calm. He found himself thinking about her long after she left that day. Her words, the vision of a future she had shared so boldly, lingered in his mind. He had lived a life without imagining much beyond the next day, and yet now he could not help but picture a home filled with voices, laughter, and the chaos of children. The idea was frightening, but it also stirred something deep inside him, a hope he thought he had lost. Over the following weeks, they saw each other often. Sometimes it was chance encounters on the trail or at the small town's market, and sometimes it was planned, quiet meetings where they shared stories and dreams. He learned about her life, about her family, her traditions, and the deep respect she carried for her culture. She, in turn, listened to him, learning of the cowboy's quiet resilience, his hard-earned wisdom, and the loneliness that had shaped him. It was not an easy connection. There were moments of hesitation, times when his doubts crept in like shadows over the sunlit plains. Could a man like him, who had spent so long alone, ever be part of a family? Could he ever give life the fullness she imagined? Yet she never pushed. She never demanded more than he was ready to give. Her strength lay in patience, in the quiet belief that life unfolded in its own time. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the desert, they sat on a small hill overlooking the town. The wind was soft, carrying the scent of sage and warm earth. The cowboy felt the weight of years on his shoulders, but he also felt a strange lightness, as if something inside him had begun to stir. "Do you ever think about what life could be like?" she asked quietly. He looked at her, unsure at first, then nodded. "I haven't, not for a long time. Life, it has been about surviving," she smiled. "Survival is not the same as living. You can survive alone, yes, but living means opening your heart, taking risks, and imagining more than just today." Her words settled over him like the evening breeze. He realized that for years he had closed himself off from life, from hope, from the possibilities that existed beyond his own walls. Yet now, as he listened to her, he could imagine a future he had never dared to dream. A home with children, with laughter echoing through the rooms. A life where he was not just a man working the land, but a man part of something larger than himself. The connection between them grew slowly, not in grand gestures but in small moments. Sharing meals, riding together across the plains, exchanging stories of the past. Each moment was a thread, weaving a tapestry of trust, understanding, and quiet affection. He began to notice the way her eyes lit up when she spoke of her family, the way her hands moved with purpose and care, and the strength in her voice when she spoke of her dreams. For the cowboy, every meeting chipped away at the walls he had built around his heart. He realized that the emptiness he had accepted was not strength, but a cage. He had believed that life had nothing more to offer, but now he began to see that the world was wider than his solitude, and life could be fuller than he had ever imagined. By the end of the season, the bond between them had grown undeniable. It was not a sudden spark, but a steady flame, built on respect, patience, and shared understanding. The cowboy, who had lived so long in silence, found himself speaking openly, laughing freely, and dreaming once again. And though the thought of 5 children still seemed overwhelming, he could no longer dismiss it. For the first time in his life, he could imagine a future not defined by what he had lost, but by what could be built. The simple words she had spoken that day on the trail, "I want to have at least 5 children," had changed something inside him. They had awakened hope, stirred courage, and opened the door to a life he had never thought possible. The desert continued its quiet rhythm, the sun setting each evening and rising anew, but the cowboy's life had changed irreversibly. In the simple, brave statement of one woman, he found a vision of family, love, and purpose that would guide him into a future he had never dared to imagine. That first meeting, seemingly ordinary, had planted a seed. And now, for the first time in years, he was ready to see what could grow from it. The days turned into weeks, and the cowboy and the Apache woman continued to see each other more often. Their meetings were never rushed. Sometimes they worked side by side on the ranch, checking fences or repairing old equipment. Other times, they rode together along the dusty trails, letting the wind carry their thoughts as freely as the horses beneath them. With every shared moment, the cowboy felt a quiet connection forming, one that went deeper than he had ever experienced with anyone before. It was strange for him. He had spent years living in solitude, thinking of people only in passing or out of necessity. Most of his days had been predictable: work, eat, sleep, and then start again. There had been comfort in routine, yes, but there had also been emptiness. Now with her, he felt a life stretching beyond the horizon. A life that was not just about surviving, but about being part of something meaningful. For the Apache woman, the cowboy was equally intriguing. She had grown up surrounded by family and culture, where community and responsibility were highly valued. Yet she had also learned to be independent, to stand firmly in her beliefs, and to protect what mattered to her. There was something about his quiet strength, his patience, and his honest way of living that drew her in. He was not flashy or boastful, but he was dependable, thoughtful, and surprisingly kind in ways that were easy to miss at first glance. As they spent more time together, they began to share stories of their past. One evening, they sat on a small hill overlooking the town, the setting sun painting the sky in soft orange and pink. The cowboy spoke of his childhood on the outskirts of another small town, where his parents had died when he was young, leaving him to navigate life mostly on his own. He remembered the long, quiet nights, the work he had done to keep the farm going, and the loneliness that had shaped him. She listened without interrupting, her eyes calm and steady. When he finished, she shared pieces of her own life. She spoke of her family, her grandparents, and the lessons they had passed down through generations. She talked about the value of community, of tradition, and of responsibility. There was pride in her voice, but also gentleness. She did not speak to impress him or to teach him. She spoke to show him the life she had known, and the life she dreamed of building in the future. Sometimes, the cowboy struggled with the differences between them. Their worlds had been shaped by very different experiences. He had grown up in solitude, learning to depend only on himself. She had grown up surrounded by people, learning to share, to give, and to trust. These differences occasionally caused misunderstandings. He would retreat into silence when he felt unsure, and she would patiently wait for him to open up again. Yet, every disagreement, every pause, was followed by renewed understanding. Their bond strengthened because they were willing to see each other clearly, without judgment, and to accept the ways they were different. One day, the cowboy faced a small but significant challenge. A sudden storm had rolled across the plains, and part of the fence he was repairing collapsed under the wind. He worked tirelessly, trying to fix it before the cattle wandered too far. The Apache woman appeared unexpectedly, helping him gather the scattered posts and mend the damaged sections. She worked with skill and determination, and he found himself appreciating her not only for her strength, but also for her calm approach. She never criticized, never rushed, but simply assisted, offering her knowledge quietly and effectively. After the storm passed, they sat together under a large tree, breathing in the fresh, rain-washed air. The cowboy realized how different life could be when shared with someone else. In that moment, he began to understand that love was not just about grand gestures or romantic words. Love could also be patience, support, and quiet presence. The Apache woman had shown him that even simple acts could carry profound meaning. As the seasons changed, their connection grew deeper. They began to imagine a life together more seriously. Conversations about the future were no longer theoretical. They became real and tangible. They spoke about home, about children, and about what kind of family they wanted to build. The cowboy sometimes felt a flicker of fear. Could he really be a husband and a father? Would he be able to meet her hopes and dreams? He had never imagined himself in that role. Yet her belief in him was unwavering. She did not push him, but her faith in their shared future was a gentle encouragement he could not ignore. The cowboy started to reflect on his past, thinking about the ways he had avoided life's possibilities. He had believed that living alone was safe and simple, but now he realized it had been lonely and limiting. Her presence had opened his eyes to a life that was not about just surviving each day, but about building, nurturing, and sharing. He began to see that the world was not as small as he had imagined. There was room for love, for family, for dreams he had never dared to voice. Their growing relationship did not go unnoticed. Some townspeople were curious, others skeptical. The cowboy had been a figure of solitude for so long that people wondered why he would change now. The Apache woman, too, faced whispers from those who did not understand her choice, but the two of them paid little attention. They had learned that their connection mattered more than opinions or gossip. Their bond was built on trust, understanding, and a shared vision, and that foundation was strong enough to withstand the quiet judgments of others. One chilly evening, as the first snow of winter dusted the plains, they found themselves walking along a frozen stream. The cowboy noticed how her eyes sparkled in the pale sunlight, how her laughter seemed to echo across the quiet land. They talked about children again, not just the idea of having them, but the kind of parents they wanted to be. The Apache woman described her hopes of raising children who were strong, kind, and grounded in both love and responsibility. The cowboy, listening, felt a stirring in his chest. For the first time, he could picture himself not only as a father, but as a man capable of guiding, protecting, and nurturing. He was still hesitant, still unsure in moments, but he could no longer deny the desire that had begun to grow inside him. The dream she had shared, the life of family, laughter, and shared responsibility, was no longer something distant or impossible. It was a possibility, one he could reach if he dared to step forward. Their journey was not without challenges. There were times when the cowboy's fears returned, creeping into conversations and silences. There were moments when the Apache woman had to remind him gently that life could be hard, but avoiding it was not the answer. She encouraged him to trust, to imagine, and to open his heart. Slowly, he learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward despite it. As winter gave way to spring, they began to plan for a future together. Small steps were taken, like discussing the house they might live in, the land they might tend, and how they would share responsibilities. The cowboy found himself thinking about names for children, about the sounds of laughter filling empty rooms, about the simple joy of sharing life with someone he loved. Every thought, every plan, was a new experience. He realized that hope could be built, nurtured, and protected, just like the land he cared for. In quiet moments when they were alone under the wide sky, he would look at her and realize how much she had changed him. Her strength, patience, and clarity had opened doors he thought were permanently closed. She had reminded him that life could be lived fully, that dreams could be shared, and that love could transform even the loneliest heart. And in these moments he began to feel something new, gratitude, not just for her presence but for the life she had inspired him to imagine. He understood that the simple sentence she had spoken weeks ago, "I want to have at least 5 children," was more than a wish. It was an invitation to grow, to dream, and to step into a life of meaning. By the end of part 2, their bond had grown unshakable. They were no longer two separate lives brushing past each other. They were becoming a single journey, intertwined with care, trust, and shared vision. The cowboy had learned to see beyond his past, to embrace hope, and to imagine a future that once seemed impossible. The Apache woman had found in him a partner capable of love, strength, and commitment. Together, they were ready to face whatever the world might bring, strengthened by the promise of a life built together. Their story, which had begun with a simple conversation on a dusty trail, was now unfolding into a journey of love, trust, and transformation. And while challenges still awaited them, the foundation they were building was strong enough to carry them through. They had learned that life was not about avoiding fear or difficulty, but about facing it together. And in that knowledge, they had discovered a new kind of strength. The months passed, and the bond between the cowboy and the Apache woman grew stronger with every day. Yet, as life often showed, love and commitment were never without their trials. They had shared dreams, laughter, and quiet moments under the vast skies, but now, the reality of life began to test them in ways they had not anticipated. One morning, the cowboy woke before dawn, feeling a heavy weight on his chest. The previous night, he had lain awake thinking about the future, and doubts had crept in like shadows across the open plains. Could he really be the man she hoped he could be? Could he meet the expectations she had for family, home, and life together? For years, he had only answered to himself, and now he was being asked to share not just his life, but his heart, his actions, and his choices in ways he had never imagined. When she arrived to meet him, she noticed his unusual quietness immediately. Her eyes, sharp and gentle, searched his face for understanding. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. He sighed, running a hand over his face. I'm just thinking. About us, about everything we are planning. I don't know if I can be enough." She sat beside him on the wooden fence they often leaned on, her hands resting lightly on her knees. "Being enough doesn't mean being perfect," she said. "It means trying. It means being willing to grow. You do not have to have all the answers. We can learn together." Her words were steady and calm, but they carried a power that made the cowboy pause. He had spent so long believing he was alone in the world, yet here was someone who trusted him enough to share life's journey with him. Slowly, he felt the tight knot of fear in his chest loosen, replaced by a cautious hope. Despite their trust, life soon presented challenges they could not ignore. One afternoon, while working on the ranch, a sudden accident occurred. The cowboy was checking a herd of cattle when a young calf became trapped near the fence. As he rushed to help, he slipped on the loose dirt, injuring his leg. He managed to free the calf, but he could no longer walk without pain. The Apache woman immediately took charge. She helped him back to the house, tending to the injury with care and patience. Over the next few days, she managed the ranch work while he recovered, showing not just skill but compassion. The cowboy realized in those moments how deeply he had come to depend on her presence, not as a convenience, but as a source of strength. She was not just a partner in dreams, but a partner in life, facing struggles side by side. Even as they supported each other, small disagreements began to surface. Their differences, once charming, now sometimes caused tension. He preferred solitude and quiet routines, while she thrived on community and shared activity. He often needed time alone to think and reflect, while she preferred to plan and act with purpose. These moments tested their patience, forcing both to consider compromise and understanding in ways they had not before. One evening, after a long day of work, the tension between them became noticeable. They had argued over a minor task, how to repair a section of fence that had been damaged in a storm. Words were spoken sharply, and the cowboy felt frustration rise within him. For a moment, he wanted to retreat into his old habit of silence, to hide from conflict as he always had. But then he looked at her. He saw not anger but concern and care in her eyes. He realized that this was not a battle to win but a lesson in learning to navigate life together. Taking a deep breath, he softened his tone. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. I don't want to fight with you." She nodded, her own eyes softening. And I don't want to fight with you. We just have different ways of doing things, but that does not mean we cannot find a way together. It was a small moment, but it marked a turning point. The cowboy realized that love was not always easy or simple. It required effort, patience, and the willingness to confront one's own fears and shortcomings. He began to understand that partnership was not just about sharing joy, but about navigating difficulties together, hand in hand. As the seasons changed, so did their challenges. The cowboy faced not just physical work, but emotional growth he had long avoided. He had to confront his fears of inadequacy, of failing those he cared for, and of stepping into responsibilities he had never imagined. Each challenge, however small, became an opportunity for growth, for learning, and for strengthening the bond they shared. The Apache woman, too, faced tests of patience and resilience. She had to balance her own dreams and expectations with his pace of adjustment. She had to remind herself that change was gradual, that love required nurturing, and that patience was often the greatest gift one could give. She taught him not through words alone, but through actions, by showing care, sharing wisdom, and standing by him even when times were uncertain. One of the most profound tests came when the cowboy received news from his past. A distant relative, someone he had not seen in years, contacted him about the family property he had inherited but never visited. The news stirred up old memories of childhood, loss, and the isolation he had felt growing up. For days, he was consumed by doubt and uncertainty. Should he go back to the past he had tried to leave behind? How would it affect the life he was now building with her? The Apache woman noticed his turmoil and offered her support without judgment. She encouraged him to face his past, not to run from it. Our past shapes us, she said softly, but it does not define us. You can honor it, learn from it, and still create the life you want with me. Her words gave him courage. Together they traveled to his childhood town, revisiting old homes, speaking with distant relatives, and confronting memories he had long buried. It was not easy. The pain and loss of the past resurfaced, but so did the understanding and acceptance he had never allowed himself to feel. And through it all, she stood by his side, offering comfort and strength when he faltered. Returning home, the cowboy felt a sense of release and clarity. He realized that his past, once a source of fear and isolation, could now serve as a foundation for growth and understanding. He had faced the shadows he had carried for so long, and with her by his side, he felt capable of stepping fully into the life they were building together. Their shared trials strengthened their relationship in unexpected ways. The cowboy began to take more initiative, not because he had to, but because he wanted to contribute to their shared life. He learned to express his feelings openly, to communicate his fears, and to trust in her support. The Apache woman, in turn, saw the courage and determination he had developed, and her respect and love for him deepened. One quiet afternoon, as they sat on a hill overlooking the plains, the cowboy finally spoke a truth he had held in his heart for years. "I used to think I was meant to be alone," he said, his voice soft. "I thought that was my life, but now I see that life can be more, that I can be more." She reached for his hand, holding it gently. "You are already more, you have only begun to see it." Life does not ask us to be perfect. It asks us to try, to love, and to grow. The cowboy felt a warmth in his chest he had never known before. He realized that the journey they were on was not just about love, but about transformation. They were learning to become better versions of themselves, guided by respect, trust, and shared dreams. As the days passed, they began to make plans for the future more concretely. Discussions of home, children, and daily life were no longer abstract. They talked about the responsibilities of raising a family, of tending the land, and of creating a life that balanced work, love, and community. The cowboy sometimes felt fear creep back in, but he had learned to face it, to speak it aloud, and to work through it with her support. The Apache woman's vision of life with 5 children was no longer a distant dream, it was becoming a shared goal. She spoke not of control, but of partnership, emphasizing that they would build their life together, each contributing their strengths and learning from each other. The cowboy, inspired by her vision, began to imagine a household filled with laughter, activity, and the messiness of life fully lived. Even amidst these dreams, reality continued to test them. Harsh weather, hard labor, and unexpected setbacks reminded them that life was never simple. Yet, each challenge faced together only strengthened their bond. The cowboy learned patience, resilience, and the quiet power of love that is steady, not flashy. The Apache woman learned that even those who seem quiet and reserved can hold a deep capacity for growth, courage, and care. By the end of this period, both had grown in ways neither could have imagined at the beginning of their journey. The cowboy had begun to shed the loneliness and fear that had defined him for so long, opening his heart to possibility, hope, and love. The Apache woman had found in him a partner capable of trust, dedication, and shared vision. Together, they had faced trials, learned from mistakes, and discovered the strength that comes from walking side by side through life's challenges. Their story was no longer just about meeting or dreaming. It was about living, facing struggles, and growing together. It was about the quiet moments of understanding, the small victories, and the courage to imagine a life beyond what they had known. And though more challenges awaited, they faced them with a growing confidence in themselves and each other, ready to continue building the life they had both longed for the years past. And the cowboy and the Apache woman had grown closer than either had ever imagined possible. Their lives were no longer separate paths crossing occasionally. They had become a single journey, moving forward together through challenges, joys, and quiet everyday moments. The dreams they had spoken of so long ago were now taking shape, step by step, in the life they shared. The cowboy had changed more than he had realized. The loneliness that had once defined him was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose he had never known. He had learned patience, courage, and the quiet strength that comes from loving and being loved. The Apache woman, too, had witnessed a transformation in him. He was no longer the quiet, cautious man who had first met her on the dusty trail. He had become a partner she could rely on, a man willing to face life's challenges and embrace its joys with her. Their home, a modest but comfortable farmhouse on the edge of the plains, became the center of their world. It was simple, with wooden floors, wide windows that let in the sunlight, and a yard where the wind carried the laughter of children. They had worked together to build it, planning each detail carefully. Every corner of the house reflected their shared efforts, their values, and their dreams. It was more than a house, it was a home, filled with the promise of life and love. The first child arrived one spring morning, a healthy baby boy who brought with him a new sense of wonder and responsibility. The cowboy held the child in his arms, feeling a joy he had never known. For years, he had imagined what life could be like, but holding his son for the first time, he understood that the imagination could never match the reality. The little boy's laughter, his tiny hands grasping at the world, and his curious eyes opened a new chapter in their lives. The Apache woman watched him with a gentle smile, seeing in him the same awe and love she felt. Together, they navigated the challenges of parenthood, sleepless nights, endless diapers, and the delicate balance of caring for a newborn while maintaining the household and work on the ranch. They learned together, discovering the rhythms of family life and finding joy in small victories, a baby's first steps, first words, and the soft, quiet moments when the child fell asleep in their arms. Over the next years, the family grew as the Apache woman's dream unfolded. Each child was welcomed with love, patience, and care. The cowboy found himself amazed at how much he could love, how much he could give, and how much he could learn from being a father. He understood that strength was not just physical but emotional, and that guiding children required patience, understanding, and a steady heart. The household was lively, full of noise, energy, and laughter. There were days when the cowboy felt exhausted from work on the ranch and the demands of family, but exhaustion was tempered by joy. He would watch his children run through the yard, hear their voices calling to each other, and feel the warmth of his wife's hand in his. Each moment was a reminder that life was richer, fuller, and more meaningful than he had ever imagined. The Apache woman had also grown in her role as mother and partner. She had nurtured not only the children but the bond between her husband and her. She taught them traditions, values, and stories from her culture, grounding their lives in history and meaning. She showed them the importance of respect, kindness, and responsibility, not as commands, but as lessons lived daily. Through her guidance, the children learned to appreciate their heritage, understand their place in the world, and embrace both love and discipline. Challenges still came, as they always do. Illness, harsh weather, and the demands of daily life tested their resilience. Yet through each trial, the cowboy and the Apache woman faced difficulties together, relying on the trust and love they had built over the years. The hardships never broke them. Instead, they strengthened their bond, teaching the children that life required courage, cooperation, and care for one another. The cowboy often reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. He remembered the lonely days when he had believed life held no more surprises for him, the quiet moments of doubt and fear, and the instant when the Apache woman had first spoken her simple yet powerful words, "I want to have at least 5 children." Those words had changed everything. They had opened his heart, stirred hope, and given him a vision of life beyond solitude. He often shared stories of their journey with the children, though in simple terms they could understand. He told them about the first time he had met their mother, about the lessons he had learned from fear and patience, and about the importance of trust, respect, and love. The children listened with wide eyes, absorbing not just the story, but the values it carried. As the years went by, the cowboy and the Apache woman continued to grow together. Their relationship deepened, not through grand gestures, but through everyday acts of love. Cooking meals together, working on the ranch, comforting one another after a hard day, and celebrating small victories. They had learned that true partnership was built on respect, shared effort, and mutual care. Their love was steady, enduring, and filled with quiet joy. The children thrived in this environment. They learned to care for each other, to help with chores, and to value both hard work and play. They understood the strength of family, the importance of tradition, and the meaning of love that is patient, forgiving, and consistent. The cowboy often felt a deep pride, seeing the values he and his wife had nurtured reflected in their children's actions and choices. The Apache woman's dream had come true. She had a family filled with life, energy, and love. Her vision of having 5 children was no longer a wish, but a reality she lived daily. She had chosen a partner who could grow with her, who could learn, love, and embrace the challenges of life. Together, they had created a home that was warm, nurturing, and full of purpose. Even in quiet moments, the cowboy felt the depth of change in his life. He no longer measured his days in hours or tasks, but in laughter, love, and shared experience. He realized that the loneliness he had once accepted as normal was not life at all. Life was meant to be shared, and through his family, he had discovered a richness beyond imagination. The years continued to pass, and the family grew in experience, wisdom, and connection. The children learned about the world from both their parents. From their father, they learned hard work, patience, and problem-solving. From their mother, they learned tradition, respect, and the power of hope. The household was a balance of discipline and freedom, guidance and exploration, structure and joy. Neighbors often admired the family, noticing how closely knit and strong their bond was. People in town would sometimes ask the cowboy how he had transformed from the quiet, solitary man into a devoted husband and father. He would smile, thinking of the Apache woman, her simple words, and the journey that had changed him. He knew the answer was simple: love, patience, and a willingness to grow together. The children grew older, each developing their own personality, interests, and dreams. The cowboy and the Apache woman supported them fully, guiding them without stifling their independence. They celebrated accomplishments, comforted failures, and encouraged curiosity and learning. Through it all, the family remained united, anchored by the lessons of trust, respect, and shared love that had been nurtured since the beginning. In moments alone, the cowboy often reflected on the incredible journey. He remembered the empty days of his youth, the routine and solitude that had once seemed sufficient, and the moment he first met the Apache woman. He realized how a single conversation, a single statement of hope and vision had changed everything. Her words had given him courage, opened his heart, and led him to a life he had never thought possible. He looked at her now, years later, standing beside him as they watched their children play in the yard. She smiled at him, her eyes reflecting love, patience, and quiet pride. He felt a deep sense of gratitude, not only for her, but for the life they had built together. Their home was not perfect, but it was full of life, meaning, and love. Every day brought new challenges, but also new joys, and they faced both with the strength of their partnership. Their story had come full circle. What had begun with a simple, bold statement, "I want to have at least 5 children," had blossomed into a life rich with love, family, and fulfillment. The cowboy had discovered that life was never meant to be lived alone, and that true happiness came from shared dreams, patience, and enduring commitment. The Apache woman had realized her vision, finding not just a family, but a partner who could grow, learn, and love with her every step of the way. In the quiet of the evening, as the sun set over the plains and the children's laughter faded into bedtime stories and whispered good nights, the cowboy and the Apache woman sat together on the porch. The wind carried the scent of earth and grass, and the sky glowed with the soft colors of twilight. They held hands, feeling the steady pulse of life and love that had grown from their shared journey. They knew there would still be challenges, as there always are in life. Illness, work, and the unpredictable events of the world would continue to test them. But they were ready together because they had built a foundation strong enough to withstand anything. They had learned that love was not just emotion, but action, effort, and understanding. And in that knowledge, they found peace. The cowboy looked at his wife, then at the children sleeping soundly inside, and felt a profound sense of completion. The empty life he had once accepted as inevitable was gone. In its place was a life filled with laughter, responsibility, love, and hope. He had learned that courage, patience, and trust could transform even the loneliest heart, and that a simple dream shared with the right person could change everything. Their story was one of transformation, love, and family. It showed that life is not about what is lost, but about what can be built together. It proved that dreams, spoken with courage and pursued with patience, can become reality. And it reminded the cowboy, every single day, that a life lived together with love and commitment is the richest life of all.